Just for informational purposes for everybody who joined us, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff in a second, but I would like the guests or attendees to know that there will be time for question and answers, and you can either put it in the chat or the Q&A box in Zoom, and Acacia and I will monitor it and try to represent your thoughts when we get to that portion of this webinar. Thank you, and Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, Alison, and everybody for joining us. I'm Jeff Schoep with Beyond Barriers. Beyond Barriers is an organization. Our concept is that we are taking apart the barriers that imprison the mind. So basically, what we do is we are an organization that involves education, preventing violent extremism, combating violent extremism, and we also bring people out of these radical extremist movements, whether you're engaged in far right extremism, far left extremism, religious extremism, a gang, anything like that. That's why we exist. We exist basically to try to help people leave that lifestyle and get back into a productive life in society.
Terrific, thank you. Let me introduce our panelists. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Alison Pure-Slovin, and I am the Midwest Regional Director for the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And for those who are not familiar with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, we're an international Jewish human rights organization, but we do fight for the rights of all people. Excuse me, we take the history of the Holocaust to ensure that never again means for everybody. And when we say Simon Wiesenthal earlier, if those were signed on, heard us speaking, most people in the world don't even know who Simon Wiesenthal was. And just to let you know, he was the greatest Nazi hunter that ever lived. And he was a survivor of concentration camps. He weighed 86 pounds upon liberation, losing 89 members of his family. And he spent the his entire life until his 90s hunting Nazis. He believed in justice, not vengeance. And I think that's a very important lesson as we are witnessing other genocides today, that it's about justice, it's not about vengeance. But let me have a moment, and I'm going to introduce our panelists today. And thank you, Jeff and Acacia, for welcoming me to this. I'm very excited to work with all of you. Let's start with Jeff, because he didn't introduce himself. Jeff Schoep. Before founding Beyond Barriers, Jeff led the largest neo-Nazi organization in the United States. After 25 years as the national leader of the National Socialist movement, Jeff now uses his past experience and insights to help combat and prevent violent extremism. Daryl Davis, welcome.
Thank you.
As a race reconciliator and lecturer, Daryl Davis has received numerous awards for his work in helping to dismantle racism across the United States. Daryl has come in closer contact with members of the Ku Klux Klan than most white non-members, and certainly most Blacks, short of being on the wrong end of a rope. What's more, he continues to do so, making him one of the most unique race relation experts and activists today. Larry Kuperman. Larry Kuperman is a director of business development for NightDive Studios, author and teacher. Larry has appeared as a guest on Beyond Barriers podcast and Coffee and Conversation. He is a full-time technology business manager and a part-time author and teacher. He is the director of business development for NightDive Studios, while also writing and teaching Jewish American history and culture, while volunteering for Beyond Barriers. Kerry Noble. Kerry was once part of a group known as CSA, Covenant, Sword, and Arm of the Lord, during the late 70s until his compound was raided by FBI in April 1985. CSA was a racist paramilitary survivalist extremist group in rural Kansas. Kerry was the second command, the propaganda minister and Bible teacher. Today, he is an author and a speaker and media consultant, expert on mindset, philosophy, and religion of extremist right cult mentality. In addition, he is a consultant on family intervention for de-radicalization and healing from hate and cults. advocate for youth-based individual and societal sound solutions for long-term effects against extremism. And last but not least is Josh, better known as Red Bransgard. He is a former white supremacist, outreach coordinator for Beyond Barriers, and co-host of The More You Know and Coffee and Conversation podcast. Welcome to everybody. You know, I don't mean to make a joke at the beginning of this, but if anybody would have told me that a quote unquote little Jewish girl would be working with formers, white nationalists or ex-KKKs or white supremacists, I would have told them years ago that they were crazy, because my journey into being a stronger Jewish activist started when I was in 5th grade, because I was in public school and I got beaten up because I killed Jesus. Subsequently, I also learned that you couldn't refer to Jesus as a Jew because it would also created a lot of violence, because you don't call Jesus my Lord Savior a dirty Jew. So again, whoever would have thought that we'd be having this conversation today and try to educate others. But I think before we can begin the discussion about unity and the perils of this country, which is what the topic is supposed to be about, I think it's important that we get a further understanding into the world of extremism and how ordinary people like yourselves, some born in America, some not, fell into the ideology of racism or hate or any of the extremist ideology. Anybody want to begin? Red, I'm going to call on you. How'd you fall into this? I'm sure you weren't born hating. People are not born hating. You didn't wake up one morning and say, I hate Jews and I hate a person of color.
You know, you're absolutely right. I don't think anyone just outright says that one day when they wake up, at least not from my viewpoint. So I grew up around some individuals, some of them were family, some of them were extended family, if you will, that you know, would make random racist comments. I mean, hell, I can remember as a young child being told that if I ever came home with a person of color, I might as well pack my stuff and get the hell out. And that was coming from my grandfather. You know, so for me, I was a little bit of a troublemaker growing up, and really what it came down to is trying to find my place. I was angry at the world. I wanted to blame anyone else but myself for my issues, that for my consequences, for my troubles, etc. And you know, it was back when online was still kind of a new thing, you know, and I started searching, and that's when I first discovered the NSM. And
don't assume that everybody understands what NSM is.
NSM is the National Socialist Movement. What at one time, and Jeff, please correct me if I'm wrong, at one time it was the nation's largest skinhead organization, correct?
Yes, the largest Nazi organization of its kind in the country. That's correct.
And you know, they painted a very, very beautiful picture for me. You know, the whole, hey, if you join up with us, you know, you're going to have all these great things. You know, we're working towards the betterment of our people. We're working towards a big and bright future. It almost sounded like a ploy from a military recruiter to a high school student, you know, is the way I remember it. And at least. And so, yeah, that, you know, and next thing you know, I'm getting a bunch of information thrown at me, the music, the flyers, the stories, the books, people telling me, hey, you know, this is what we believe in, why, this is who it's modeled after. You know, I was no stranger to a portion of it, 'cause, all through middle school and even high school, I studied history, and World War II at that time was my favorite section of our history to study. primarily due to the complexity of everyone that was involved and just how many different factions, if you were, that were involved in World War II. But anyway, so yeah, that's how I came to be involved in, at least in a nutshell.
Thank you. Jeff, we use the word a lot in this country, and that is nationalism. I don't know that everybody who reads the news or is following what's going on in all the we speak about understand what exactly is nationalism and what the fear is of nationalism. Do you want to give a little bit of a tutorial?
Sure. Well, nationalism in itself is basically someone that supports their nation. How it can become toxic is where when that nationalism gets the person where they're so isolated, much like when you enter the movement, you become stuck behind these barriers or in this bubble or in an echo chamber, and you're basically it's all consuming. And nationalism works like that in a lot of ways also, where it's okay to be patriotic. It's absolutely fine. I mean, I think people should be patriotic, but when it goes into a point where you start isolating and feeling like all that matters is your nation and not the other people of the world, I think that we're doing a disservice to humanity in that sense. And we're isolating ourselves, and that can often lead down other rabbit holes, basically, that bring people into radicalization and then further on into extremism.
Thank you. Kerry, oh, go ahead, Daryl, thank you.
I was going to dovetail into what Jeff said. He's absolutely right. He gave you the definition of nationalism. And what we have done in this country is we have distorted it. We have twisted it to fit our own interpretation and our own narrative. We didn't talk so much about nationalism, 20, 30 years ago. And even before that, the first term was supremacist. I'm a white supremacist, and that was the term. And people believed in white supremacy. And so they joined up to feel supreme or whatever. And then over time, because of all the violence and all that kind of thing that was associated with white supremacy, a lot of people who particularly did not care for, say, Black people or Jewish people began to distance themselves from white supremacy because it carried too much baggage. While they didn't like Blacks and Jews, they didn't want to participate in night riding, I'm talking about the Klan and things like that. So they distanced themselves and dropped out of the white supremacist movement. So they had to, the white supremacist movement had to rebrand because they were losing too many people. The term white supremacist was not very palatable. So they came up with a new name, white separatist. I don't hate Black people, I just love my own. Blacks should have their own neighborhoods, their own swimming pools, their own workplace, their own schools, and so should Jewish people. We should have ours. So that way, we don't have to mix, that's fine. So people became a white separatist. Oh yeah, I can get along with that. Now I'm a white separatist, sign me up. And that movement grew. But then along with that, eventually came the violence. So people began dropping out again. And they had to rebrand the name white separatist because white supremacists did not carry a good feeling, neither did white separatists. So they rebranded it to white nationalist. We all are nationalists. We all love our country, as Jeff said, is somebody who loves their nation. I love my nation, so I'm a nationalist. Kerry is a nationalist. You're a nationalist, Alison. So is Red and Larry. We all are nationalists. But then when you start saying, I'm a Black nationalist, I'm a white nationalist, that's when it gets a little, fuzzy there. And then that starts leaning more towards Black supremacy or white supremacy. Why can't we just be a nationalist? But when you identify yourself as a white nationalist, it's like a continuation of white supremacy or white separatism. So as they say, a rose by any other name is still a rose. You can call it whatever you want to call it, it's still a rose. So it's kind of like a rebranding so it becomes more palatable and it will invite more. Hey, you love your country? Yeah, I love my country. And you're white? Okay, if you love your country, you're a nationalist. If you're white, you're a white nationalist. But that has a negative connotation to it. Why can't we just say I'm a nationalist? It's sort of like the word proud and pride. They mean the same thing. To me, we need to go back to the original definition of the word proud and pride. And the original definition is the feeling that is derived from accomplishment. That's what makes you proud. Like, I won the 10K, I won, you know, the Miss America contest, or, you know, whatever you want, you know, you achieved. I wrote a book, I'm proud of that. All right. Or I got a degree in this, I'm proud of that. But I cannot say I'm proud to be Black. I don't believe anybody can say I'm proud to be white. You did not accomplish that. You're Black because your mom and dad are Black. You're Jewish because your mother is Jewish. You're white because your mom and dad are white. They accomplished that. They can be proud of you. What have you done? What have you accomplished that you can say, I'm proud of? You know, you can say, I'm proud to have achieved something, you know, like you have your own media company, or you have this, you're proud of that. So we need to go back to the original definition. We all can say, I'm not ashamed of being Black. You should not be ashamed of being white or be ashamed of being Jewish. We should respect each other as human beings, and then they get more respect when they have accomplished something in their humanity. They've done something, you know. That's what we should be proud of, not just walk around, you know, I'm proud to be Black, or white pride, Black pride. What have you done?
It's interesting. Thank you. Kerry, in your experience, in your years in the movement or CSA, do you agree with, I mean, why did you get into it? How did you go down that rabbit hole, so to speak? And is it because you wanted to feel proud as a white Caucasian American nationalist? I mean, what drove you to it?
Ours was a little different because our group started out as just a Christian community. When I first moved there, we weren't racist, it wasn't paramilitary, none of that. It was just apocalyptic, which meant that we were one of those groups that believed that Christ was coming in the second coming, the end times scenario. And we were preparing for that. Typically in Christianity, most churches will teach that in the end times, Christians are taken away in rapture, and then you're going to have a tribulation period on the earth. We didn't believe that. We believed that Christians were going to go through the tribulation, and we needed to be ready for that to help people when they came out of the cities and judgment of God and all that kind of stuff, to house them, clothe them, feed them, that kind of thing. We sort of progressed step by step. I moved to the group in 77, 78. We came across a guy who said, yes, what you're doing in building a refuge is a good thing, but how will you protect yourself against all the bad people that also will come out of the cities, which was not anything in our, we really hadn't considered it by that point. And he said, you're going to need guns. So, you know, we went the step from a peaceful rural community to the paramilitary part first. And he threw out terms that we weren't used to, the conspiracy theories of the Illuminati, the Bilderbergers, the Council of 13, Council of Foreign Relations, that kind of stuff. So we looked at everything from a Christian church paradigm of the end times. So we tried to put all those pieces together in that scenario. So that was new to us, and getting the guns, you know, added to just a defensive mode. The racist part came a year later when we were introduced to Christian identity, which is the religion of most right-wing supremacists. And that took us about 6 months later, because, you know, once we were kind of used to the thought of there's these powerful forces behind the curtain controlling everything, and then here came Christian identity saying, well, those forces, if you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, were Jewish. That kind of really didn't, it took us a while to get used to that, to see how that fit in. I had issues with the early part because before moving to our group, I had Black friends, and so to characterize them as not on the same, you know, having come from Adam and Eve like we thought white people and everybody did, that was a little difficult. But then when we were handed the stereotypes of Jews or homosexuals or any other kind of a group, that was easier for us to stereotype. So then it sort of closer identified what we would call in those days the enemy at that point. Like I said, it took us about 6 months. So ours was more from trying to be from a religious point of view. I remember in the 60s growing up, as an example, when we were having race wars and a lot of upheavals in college campuses. I could ask, I remember asking our Sunday school teacher one time in church, so what does the Bible say about race? And I was told we don't talk about race. This is in the South. Southern Baptists, we just don't discuss that. That's a taboo topic. So I never understood what the big deal was in terms of race when I was just growing up. Well, then here come the Christian identity movement, and who was not only willing to talk about race in the scriptures, but wanted to talk about race. So we ended up looking at scriptures from a different point of view, obviously, but it answered what we thought in those days as some questions that myself and the leader of our group had since we were just kids growing up in church. So, as when you were talking earlier about your childhood, the Jews killed Christ, was the first time we'd even thought in terms of that. I never had crossed that when I was in Texas. Of course, Texas was a little bit different in the South because we weren't really that much involved in the Civil War, but as opposed to some Southern states. But, when people were after Christian identity saying, well, it's the Jews that killed Christ, it's the Jews that are causing all the problems, and they're manipulating the other races to do whatever. Then it became more of an issue with us in terms of identifying a so-called enemy at that point.
Thank you. Before I move on, I want to say hello to my colleague from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Rick Eaton, who said that for anybody who would like to understand a transformation of a Christian community, he highly recommends your book, Kerry, Tabernacle of Hate. And he said it's excellent. So if anybody's interested, I just thought I'd share that. Larry, let me move.
That was nice of Rick. I will tell you that the Wiesenthal Center in LA was the only organization that carried my book in those days, when the book first came out. And I really appreciated that from Wiesenthal Center.
In a little bit, we're going to turn to why people got out of the movement. But before we do that, I have questions of Larry, and that is, you were never involved in extremism. I would assume, I don't know you, I assume grew up Jewish.
So I did grow up Jewish in New York, which I often refer to as, the other Jewish homeland, But it's funny about that. There's a great article written by Beyond Barriers member and a friend of ours, Freddie Cook, about how fear plays a part in this. Of course, I was in New York during some challenging times. Let me say in the course of my teaching, I've taught for close to 15 years on Jewish American identity, and I always begin by saying, people are people. They're good and they're not so good, and you get them in relatively equal measures. I always tell my class, if you want to be famous by association, if you want to say, well, I'm Jewish like Albert Einstein, like Sigmund Freud, that's great, but you get Bernie Madoff is part of that package deal. Not so proud of that one. Personal hero of mine is Rabbi Heschel, who marched with Martin Luther King, and that's great that you get him, but you also get Rabbi Meir Kahane in New York, and so when you talk about that, I was not involved. Let me rephrase that. I was on the fringes. I was certainly aware of radicalism more from the left, but Meir Kahani's formation of the Jewish Defense League in New York, again, it was motivated by fear. They, without defining who they are out to get us. And you know, in this case, they would look like Kerry and like Daryl. Those are the people that are out to get us in New York at the time, and so we have to get them first. Does that answer the question, Alison?
Yeah, yes, and we'll get back to it in a minute because I did have questions specifically about Frederick Cook's article. But before we go there, Daryl, I have to tell you, I mean, everybody's fascinating, but is bizarre the right word? You are a person of color who works with the KKK, and I just can't wrap my head around that. How does a black man attend KKK rallies?
Oh, Daryl,
you're muted. Muted.
Well, this black man attends them by invitation sometimes.
That's bizarre. Sorry.
But you know, speaking of Rabbi Kahani, the son of the man who murdered him, it was, you know, the son is a he disowns his father. Yep. His father's in prison now. He's a very good friend of mine, and you know, there's a lot going on there, you know, and it's like Larry points out, you know, you get the whole package, you know, when you try to associate with someone, you know, of a certain ilk, like, you know, you associate with Albert Einstein, you get Bernie Madoff. You associate with this famous black person, you get that infamous black person kind of thing. But, you know, I benefited a lot, Alison, from travel. And to date, I've been to 57 different countries on 6 continents and 49 of our 50 states. I'll be 63 next week. And I started traveling when I was age 3 because my parents were in the US Foreign Service. Today, I'm a professional musician and I travel to perform. And the thing that I noticed was no matter how far I went from this country, whether it's right next door to Canada or Mexico or halfway around the globe, no matter how different the people were that I would encounter, they look different than I do, they speak different, they may have different customs, different cultures, they may worship differently than I do. I always ended up concluding that they all were human beings. And as such, everybody, myself included, everybody that I would meet would want 5 things in their lives. They all wanted to be loved. They all wanted to be respected. They all wanted to be heard. They all wanted to be treated fairly. And they all wanted the same thing for their family as I want for my family. And if we treat people by employing those 5 principles in whatever culture culture or society in which we find ourselves, whether it's in some foreign land or domestically here, or even the culture of supremacy, we will find our navigation to be a lot smoother and a lot more positive. And of course, you know, we are going to run into those people who will never change. We know that. You know, there will be people on all sides who will go to their grave being anti-Semitic, racist, violent, hateful. But if people like that, who have that mentality, are willing to sit down and have a conversation, and we're willing to employ those 5 principles of respect, of allowing them to be heard, things like that, we will find that oftentimes it will be reciprocated. And we cannot expect anybody to listen to us unless we're willing to listen to them. And in listening to them, then we can find out what is the issue that perhaps we can address. What is the myth that they are believing about us that may not be true, and we can address it. But we don't know if we just shut them down and want them to hear us. And when I say respect, I don't mean that necessarily, you know, when I'm sitting down talking to a Klansman, he's telling me, you know, that I'm prone to crime because I have black skin and black people are inherently lazy. We don't want to work. You know, we want to scam the government welfare system. We always have our hands out for a freebie. and that Black people are born with a smaller brain than white people, and the larger the brain, the more capacity for intelligence, the smaller the brain, the lower the IQ. I've been told all that to my face. You know, I'm not respecting what he's saying. I'm simply respecting his right to say it. And when he, you know, when I don't push back and attack him for saying that, he's curious as to how come this guy isn't pushing back? How come he doesn't want to, you know, debate that? And then he's like more, you know, like, I wonder what he has to say about that. And so then when I respond, you know, to those things, you tell me I'm a criminal. Well, I'm as Black as anybody he's ever seen. I don't have a criminal record. I've never been on welfare. He evidenced that Black people's brain is smaller because he said consistently year after year, Black students, high school students, score lower on the SATs than white kids do. And this is true. This is absolutely true. But he's looking at the data, and the data does reflect that. But he's not looking at the reason why. Look at, where do most Black kids go to school? In the inner city. Where do most white kids go to school? In the suburbs. It's a fact. The inner city schools are not as good as the suburban schools. They don't have the funding, they don't have the facilities, the textbooks, or the higher level teachers. And I'll guarantee you, Black kids who go to school in the suburbs score just as high, if not higher, than some white kids in those schools. White kids who go to school in the inner city score just as low, if not lower, than some of the Black kids. It has absolutely nothing to do with somebody's skin color or the size of their brain, but it has everything to do with the quality of the educational system in which that child is enrolled. So when I don't push back and attack him for calling me stupid, more or less, and I give him that perspective, then he's able to think about it, because I've not attacked him, I've simply defended something. And then when he checks that out, he realizes, oh, that is a possibility. And now he's more curious to learn more. And that's how I get.
You're describing what in numerous conversations I've had with Jeff about how he got out of the movement. And if you don't mind, let's segue into it, because
Sure.
I think you led right into what, and I suspect Red's going to say and Kerry's going to say about people reaching out to them. And if you'd like to share a little bit, like Jeff, you were very involved in the movement. You're the highest ranking commander to leave the National Socialist Movement. You were there for what, 27 years, as I recall? I mean, you don't wake up one morning and say, oh, guess what? I love all the people I hated yesterday. How does it happen?
Daryl set that up and explained that perfectly, and I want to amplify that, because it's dialogue and civil discourse, and that's really what it comes down to. And in fact, in my own personal trajectory in getting out, it was meeting Daryl and Dia Khan and a number of other people that are not public figures, but Daryl and Dia specifically, and exactly how Daryl just explained that, sitting down, having these discussions. When Daryl and I met, it was for his documentary, Accidental Courtesy. I was going into that interview thinking at the time, I'm gonna spew some propaganda for the movement. That's why I participated. And I came away with meeting a new friend and having this new respect for somebody that I had no idea that did these sorts of things. And the really interesting thing about meeting Daryl was, typically when I did interviews for documentaries and things of that nature, I would do background checks. I would check out the film company. I would see who I was meeting with. I didn't do, for whatever reason, just by chance or fluke or whatever it was, I did not do that at all. So when Daryl walked up to me outside, I didn't even know who he was. I didn't know anything about this particular film or anything like that. And hearing his stories, and a lot of people, we talked, you mentioned fear a little bit earlier, and Larry mentioned fear and Fred Cook. And it's a really good article for anybody that hasn't read it. It's on the website, but it's fear. You know, the movement is very much fear-based. A lot of it has to do with misunderstandings and people getting involved in this. thinking that they're doing something good. A lot of times the trajectory people hear or assume is that everybody that's involved in it was driven by hate, that hate is why they joined. It's all hate, hate, hate. That's not accurate. Hate is developed there. Hate is nurtured in the movement, but that's not the reason why most of the people do not get involved over hate. I think if someone, and I met these people over the years too, there is some people that are completely motivated by hate and that's why they join the movement. I would say psychologically, those people fall into the category of your sociopaths and psychopaths. And I have met those people, but those are the vast minority of the people that are involved in these extremist movements. Most of them that are involved are people that truly believe they're doing something good, something noble, something honorable. And then they fall into this, they get locked behind those barriers or in that echo chamber. And now the hate is being developed. Now they're on this new mission and it's a really vile mission, but they're not seeing that. So when you meet someone, and this is like the work that we do at Beyond Barriers too. So meeting somebody like Daryl, and we're having this conversation, Daryl's explaining to me how as a child, how hate, how the movement, how racism affected him, how as a Boy Scout at 7 or 8 years old, that people were throwing rocks at him, adults were throwing rocks at him because of the color of his skin. That set deep inside of me at that time. And I didn't act like it bothered me at the time because I knew I was on camera. I knew I was there to spew my propaganda for the National Socialist movement. But deep down inside, that was one of the major seeds that was planted that changed me, because now I'm thinking, well, I'm doing this great thing. I'm involved in this great movement. At the time, that's how I was thinking. And here's this individual sitting across from me that just explained how racism, how hatred affected him as a young man. And as a father, I'm thinking, wow, what if somebody had done something like that to one of my children? What, you know, I can't even say how I would react to something like that. So I had to rationalize that in my brain at the time. Like, how can you rationalize that? And so, okay, well, maybe that just happened to him. But the truth is that happens to people all over the country, all over the world. That's happened to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that have been damaged by this ideology. So that gets to answer some of that question, is that basically picking apart these ideologies and realizing how that ideology damages other human beings, then you start realizing, hey, this isn't a noble cause. This is not a cause about loving your people and things like that. If it's damaging people in that way and it drives others to do even worse things, we've seen people that have walked into synagogues, into mosques, into churches, and just started shooting innocent people. And we've all seen this. This has been taking place in recent years and even just months. It's continuously happening. So that's where the hate that is nurtured there in these movements can lead.
I think we need to let Red speak because his head's going to fall off from his agreement.
You know, Jeff hit the nail right on the head, honestly. And I know I can speak for myself and probably a lot of other both current and former skinheads. When I joined the movement, it wasn't necessarily about hate in the beginning. Yeah, I was angry at the world, but, you know, I had chosen my actions prior to joining the movement. And, you know, the trouble that I'd gotten into, it was all on me. However, as I got to talking to some of the guys in the movement, it was like, oh, well, hey, maybe this isn't my fault. Maybe it's this person's fault. Maybe it's this group's fault. Maybe, you know, and on and on and on. So honestly, I mean, I can't really explain it much better than what Jeff did. You know, you really are, the hate becomes infused in you. It really does. And kind of, I want to circle back real quick, if I may, to something that Daryl said when you were starting to have open conversation with some of these folks from the KKK and so forth. I think that's one of the many things that we're missing, honestly, in our current society, is that open dialogue with one another. We all want to react a certain way because it's a topic either we're afraid of, we don't know enough about, or it just makes us uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable is not a bad thing, but I think if we were willing and we all truly wanted to be to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, even just for a moment, we could have that regular open dialogue with one another. And I think a lot of the current societal issues could start being put on a track towards healing.
Kerry, how about you? How did you get out?
Well, I was the propaganda guy for our group, so I put out not only read all the material that came in because I was the teacher of the group. I had to read it all before it got to everybody else. So I was extremely indoctrinated. Then as the propaganda guy, I'd write everything that went out to the public on our mailing list. This was pre-internet days, obviously, when I was in there. So we had a mailing list of 2,000 people in those days that we'd send material out. But one of the materials that I had received, and I think it was from Marianaceous, but I don't remember for sure, said even doctors recognize the fact that there's difference in races because they won't give the blood from a black man to a white man, which obviously isn't true. In those days, I didn't know that wasn't true. I just accepted that as true because somebody from the movement sent it to me, right? So I published that in one of our journals, and a doctor who, I don't know why he got our material, but anyway, he wrote me back and sent me probably 1.5 inches thick of papers that proved that that was wrong, that blood transfusions had nothing to do with race. So I started reading it, and I had to quit reading it because then I started becoming accountable for what I was reading. But even though I set it down, it stayed in the back of my mind about what this doctor was saying, that what I had put out was not true. So that started me kind of questioning, well, if this isn't true, what else am I being told as truth isn't true? What am I putting out that's not true? So it started thinking, because what people don't really realize, once you've been in an isolated group of, whether it's a cult, whether it's white supremacists, whatever it is, there's a certain point in time that you just kind of quit thinking. You accept all the propaganda, you accept what everybody says, especially your leadership, because why would they lie to you? So now I get this material in and I start questioning what I'm being taught by the movement. And it was, for me, that started kind of opening up everything. And then a few months after that, I was doing a Bible study because I was the Bible teacher. And I came across some scriptures that I hadn't looked at in a particular point of view without getting too technical on it. And it started tearing down some basic teachings that I had been raised up in the church. So then I started questioning, because in the church you're taught, mankind is basically evil and sinful, and that's why we do all the bad stuff that we do and that kind of thing. And I started looking at it from a different point of view, that mankind is actually, good and divine and doesn't start out trying to be bad and evil. So that started kind of tearing down a lot of theological stuff for me. And then I started realizing that the leader of our group, I caught him in some lies, caught him in some deceptions, and caught him in taking advantage of senior citizens, as an example. And that then really started my thinking of, what are we doing here? This it's not right. If I can't trust the leader of our group, how do I know the leaders of other groups are any better? So just started tearing down all of those, that belief system that I had built up over the last few years.
Thank you. Larry, on The View, co-host Megan McCain was speaking about racism and forgiveness, etc. And she admitted that Nick Cannon, who's working on forgiveness and is doing real work to atone for the things that he said about anti-Semitism, But she said her concern for some reason is that anti-Semitism is something we let people forget a lot easier than any other forms of bigotry and racism. I quote her, "I find that people who say anti-Semitic things are forgiven a lot easier than anything else. And I think that it's something we really need to examine as a society." And then she added, "I think that anti-Semitism is still sort of the last form of passable bigotry in America. This isn't just about Nick Cannon. It's why we Americans seem to find more forgiveness in our heart for racism other than anti-Semitism." In your work with Beyond Barriers or working with formers or in the path that you've taken, do you find that anti-Semitism is the last layer that goes away in terms of the bigotry against people?
I'm going to say no on that. I think that there are other forms of prejudice that are even more accepted. One of them certainly being sexism. You mentioned my company a couple of times. We're a completely distributed computer company, computer games company. We have people from literally all over the world, and everyone works from a home environment. There is no office. It's all based on the work that we get done. It wasn't something that we designed beginning, to recruit people, but for a number of people who would be uncomfortable or who might be uncomfortable working in a traditional office, it's been a great place. And I don't mean to say this for any one group of people that suffer from PTSD, people that suffer from, but we have a number of people who are transitioning, who are transgender, and it's not an issue for us, but I certainly know that my transgender friends would say that that the amount of prejudice and hatred that they receive has not diminished and is considered acceptable. That said, Alison, I was recently in a conversation with a good friend of mine, with Rabbi Axelrad here in the Henderson area. He's the rabbi at Congregation or Talmud, and he asked, not in a challenging manner, he asked why I talk to people who are anti-Semites, and I said, well, because the foundation of anti-Semitism, as Kerry just said, is lies. And you don't combat lies with silence or ignoring them. You combat lies by telling the truth.
I would agree there. A lot of people are having many conversations. By the way, all of you could have written the book for what fake news became in this country today, not knowing social media at the time that you were extremists. But as you said, Kerry, you were reading all this information. It was being fed to you. It had to be the gospel, so to speak, because your leaders were saying it. I think that's a lot about what's going on in fake news. But in terms of Frederick Cook's article that a few of us have brought up today, in regards to fear, and then he wrote, extremism is fear. And based on what he wrote, isn't that what people of all colors, faiths, and gender identities are feeling today in America? And anybody want to jump in? I mean, isn't it fear that's driving what we're seeing? Is it fear that happened on January 6th? What are we witnessing in America today? I will know my colleague Rick Eaton will say that unfortunately the haters have been there all the time. Social media has just given them another avenue to get their messaging out there. That's nothing new. Extremism's been there. It's just that there's another way to reach more people. But is it fear that's driving it? Is that what happened January 6th? What's happening in this country, which we should discuss, and since that was the title of the topic? Jeff?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go, Kerry. Then how about Kerry, Jeff?
Fear to me is obviously way more powerful, because part of the main reason you get involved with white supremacy and the whole hate movement is because there's part of your life that you don't feel like you have control anymore. You're afraid of the future. You're afraid of your present situation. So it was mentioned before, so you have to start to blame somebody, because if I'm fearful about my present circumstances. And I'm fearful that I can't provide for my family. I'm fearful for that things are not, you know, the old status quo. Things are just changing. And it's even back in my day when it was, you know, abortion had just been considered legal, prayer was kicked out of school. You can come up to the present day of all the things that are going on. People get afraid. In our society today, you can go to, am I going to have a job tomorrow? You know, much less even think in terms of retirement a few years down the road. That wasn't necessarily a concern whenever I got involved with it. So you have those fears, and once you're introduced to somebody in the movement, they know how to push those fear buttons so that they can tell you who's to blame for your fears or your problems. Because somebody said, well, go, you shirk personal responsibility. When we're talking in terms especially of globalism, nationalism, which is just a us versus them mentality of globalism. From a Christian point of view in the churches, part of the main issue right now today is in terms of Christian nationalism, you know, and it's the fear that America in 20 years, 30 years will not be the same America from their point of view, that we will become more socialist, more liberal. So if not even in terms of racial hatred, if you're fearful for how you believe in Christianity, that it won't be around in 20 or 30 years, then you come to the point of, well, what am I going to do about it? You know, is Christianity going to be wiped away from our country and then from the world? And for Christian people, that's a very strong fear in them. So then that opens the doors for them to be manipulated into something worse, as we saw from January 6th. You know, they're just fearful that our country is changing with not necessarily any basis of reality in it, just in terms of the propaganda that they've been taught, in terms of how their own circumstances in life has changed, and from the point of view that there are preachers in the Christian circles who continually prophesy supposedly that you know, the end times are coming and judgment's coming, and there has to be a reason for this judgment. You don't go from A to Z overnight. You look at the steps of what you perceive to be the downfall of society, and if you're fearful, you'll almost always will look for something to, you know, be a healing salve to that fear. You want somebody to blame, whether it's the Jews, the blacks, the liberals, the gays. It doesn't really matter. You know,
or all of the above.
I'm sorry?
Or all of the above.
Or all of the above, yeah, because it does become all. You know, so it's, people just want, as Daryl was saying, there's commonalities of what we all really want in life. You know, the respect. We want safety. We want to be able to grow, for our children to grow up in a safe environment and be able to prosper in this country. And when you start seeing those American dream kind of things falling apart, you feel like you have to have somebody to blame for that. And that leaves everybody else vulnerable that you can point a finger to. And it's not just, doesn't make sense when you start really examining it. But that's part of what fear does to people, is it, you know, the whole us versus them mentality takes over.
Jeff, I know that when we recently had the opportunity to spend the Jewish Sabbath together, Shabbat, we had some wonderful conversations at our table together. And one of the things that blew me away was you said that in your personal journey that anti-Semitism or the hatred of Jews was the last layer to fall away for you. And I'm sorry, Daryl, I don't mean this disrespectfully. And I said, I find that fascinating. I really thought it would be a person of color. So I would suggest that you would agree that people are more forgiving of racism against other people, but it's okay still to dislike a Jew, based on what you were thinking.
Well, for me, well, first of all, I want to say on the previous question on fear, Kerry nailed it. I mean, he absolutely nailed it on that. And onto participating in the first Shabbat. That was quite an experience, and I want to thank you again for that, Alison. That was a really wonderful experience for me. But yes, you're right. Everyone's trajectory is a little bit different. For some people, you know, just as Larry had mentioned, it's the trans individuals that are, you know, is a thing that a lot of people struggle with. For others, it's blacks. In my trajectory, the National Socialist movement was so incredibly anti-Semitic. It had so much anti-Semitism blended into that organization. That's, for me, that was the last straw. That was the last thing I had to get past. But part of that was too, is isolating myself from Jewish people for the most part. I knew literally one Jewish lady when I was in the movement. That was it, one. And I just did not, I fell down that rabbit hole, and I just didn't believe anything. I believed the propaganda. There's a term that a lot of people may or may not be familiar with, but it's called confirmation bias. And I definitely had confirmation bias. So with confirmation bias, you're presented with two sets of so-called truths, where you have the real truth and you have what, in this case, what the movement thinks. So I blew off the real truth because I had this confirmation bias. It was so deep, so deeply seated that I didn't look at the other truth. I wasn't allowing myself to see that. So that's when we talk about being behind the barriers or being in this echo chamber or a bubble, not being able to see that. And incredibly, meeting Jewish people, experiencing things with Jewish people. One of the first people that, when I had left the National Socialist movement, Rick Eaton, who I believe is listening tonight, Rick in the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and this is another reason why I'm a big fan of the Wiesenthal Center, and as you know, but Rick Eaton came right out to Detroit and met with me, and we sat down and talked. And since then, it was the Wiesenthal Center and another former a friend, T.M. Garrett, that had suggested I go to a synagogue and meet with Jewish people. And it was those experiences, those not learning from a book, but learning from real life experiences, and having those conversations, having that civil discourse. And my friend, the one friend I had that was Jewish when I was in the movement, I could always ask her questions, and she didn't get offended, and she had that civil discourse, as a lot of the other speakers were saying here this evening, is that those conversations. I mean, even when it's stuff that's vile, that you don't want to hear, or that could be very offensive, why Daryl is so effective with reaching these people is because, as he said, you know, it's hearing those things and listening. And one thing about the movement, and I know we tackle all kinds of extremism, but a lot of our expertise comes from the far right, because that was where some of us had come from. But in the far right, respect is everything. At least that's how they feel. Like, it is everything. So if you sit down and you listen to what they're saying, no matter how vile or offensive it is, they have to listen to what you're going to say now, because it's respect. Respect is given, respect is earned, and it goes both ways. So that's where we're finding is the biggest doorway, or that window, to try to reach and to touch the humanity of the person sitting across from you, is to break through that wall and touch the humanity of the individual across from you. It's incredible.
I'm going to ask a few more questions. Daryl, I was going to get to you. But for those who are listening, if you want to ask a question, please put it into the chat or put it into the Q&A. And Daryl, I was going to get to you because exactly what Jeff said, obviously, is what you were saying earlier about respect, about having a conversation. So I think that one of the questions that should go to you and Larry and of course anybody else on here, right, is how do people who have not yet met a former or reach out to, how do we help change the world and the trajectory of what we're seeing? Daryl, if you had something else to say, I apologize, but I want you to incorporate that in also.
How do we change the world? Well, first we have to learn about who they are, how they arrived at those positions. Try to understand their position. put yourself in their shoes, understand who you are, and have a conversation. Both Kerry and both Jeff talked about how somebody from somewhere else provided them with another perspective. Jeff talked about my Cub Scout story and our mutual friend Dia Khan, having those conversations with her that presented him with something that he didn't know. Kerry talked about his propaganda, and then somebody sent him some information about blood separation. You know, in this country, it was a Black doctor who invented the process of separating blood plasma, Dr. Charles Drew. And blood, whatever type it doesn't matter whether it's from a Black person or a white person or an Asian person, it's the same. But even the Red Cross back in the day segregated blood and only gave a white person's blood to a white person and so forth and so on. They didn't cross do that until they found out that there is no difference. And so it was Kerry's, ability to hear what that guy was saying and look it up and then struggle with it. Well, do I tell the truth or do I continue this lie? Or Jeff's position, how would I like this if it happened to my kid? That kind of thing. A missed opportunity for dialogue is a missed opportunity for conflict resolution. And one of the things, we spend all kinds of time, we talk about blame here for a moment. We spend a lot of time talking about the other person, or talking at the other person or talking past the other person. Why not just spend a little bit of time talking with the other person? And that solves a lot of issues. One of the things that is happening in this country, and Kerry mentioned it as well, 20, 30 years from now, what's this country going to become? Fear, all right? When we all were children, the Black population in this country was 12%, and Native Americans were 1%. Hispanic people were right around 2%, Asians right around 3%, and white people were 84, 86%. Today, Black people remain at 12%. It's like 12.9, almost 13%. So we really have not grown. Native Americans remain at 1%. Asians are now at 6%. Hispanic people are at 17 point something percent, almost 18%. So if you take just 12% Black people and 17% Hispanic people, that right there by itself is 29% non-white. This is happening, and it's well predicted in the year 2042. This country will be 50-50, 50% white and 50% non-white. By non-white, I mean Black, Hispanic, Asian, etc. All right, and between 2045 and 2050, it's going to flip, and whites will become the minority. And while there are plenty of white people in this country that embrace that, they welcome it, say, hey, I don't have a problem with that, no big deal. There is a segment of the population that is very fearful of that, and what people still in the Klan and neo-Nazi movements and alt-right tell me is, Daryl, I don't want my grandkids to be brown. They call it the browning of America, or white genocide through miscegenation. And that's what they're fearing. So you're having all these groups pop up. When I first started doing this kind of stuff almost 40 years ago, this marks my 37th year of doing this kind of work. It was just, maybe 3 groups of people. You had the Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis, white power skinheads. That was about it. Now you got those 3 groups, plus the alt-right, plus the Proud Boys, plus white Aryan resistance, plus the 3%ers, plus on and on and on, CSA, et cetera, the Minutemen, the Posse Comitatus, on and on and on. And now they're all trying to bring people in because of that change, that fear that's changing. And that's why we're seeing more and more of these lone wolves, because these groups are pandering to fear. We need to take our country back, build that wall, make America great again, all that kind of thing. And when people go and join these groups and the group fails to take our country back, some people get frustrated and say, you know what, if the Klan can't do it or the NSM can't do it, I'll do it myself. And that's when they go solo, become a lone wolf and walk into a Black church, boom, 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 or the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, same thing, or the Walmart in El Paso, or the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin,
right.
Or that kind of thing. Those are lone wolves.
So, right, and speaking of that, we do have a question, sorry to interrupt you, from the attendees about the tragedy, the recent tragedy, or all the other tragedies you just spoke about, but in Atlanta. And
Yep.
Brad, what's your thought about that? How do we prevent those kinds of lone wolves, as Daryl was saying, or extremists, or people who feel that they have the right to go and kill someone because they're Asian or Jewish or LGBTQ or Muslim or anything?
So before I try attempt to give any sort of opinion or answer to that question, let me preface by saying I am not completely up to speed as to what happened in Atlanta. I do know that it was a serious shooting at a massage parlor.
They think it's not 100% a hate crime. They think it may be because you did kill 6 people who are Asian. So it's still under investigation about whether it was a hate crime or just somebody. But having said that, I think after what Daryl was just saying, we should talk about how do we prevent these lone wolves from going out and acting out against people that they think they hate.
That is a very, very good question. And I'm going to be brutally honest. I'm not sure myself personally how to answer that. Daryl mentioned earlier that the hatred's never going to completely go away from people. I think if we as a society can come together and drop our differences and become united, right, I think that will definitely help work towards lessening the events of these lone wolves going out and acting out. I think regardless of whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, if we drop our differences, come together in solidarity as a community, as a people, right? Regardless of race, religion, etc., I think that's going to send that message out to not only the groups but to the lone wolves, as you worded it, to be like, hey, look, what you're doing is not okay. Sure, can you enact various gun laws and things of that nature? Absolutely, you could. Will that prevent them and stop them? I don't think so.
Well, I would say to Kerry, isn't that hard to do? I'm going to play devil's advocate with you. I do believe that we have to embrace people. I work in that arena all the time. But Kerry, when you're in a militia group and you're teaching hate and you're trying to, how does that work? It's different messages now.
Let me start by saying that I was a lone wolf. That whole term came about when I was in the movement. In '83, that was the coinage in those days. In '84, I took a bomb into a gay church for the purpose of committing domestic terrorism, which in those days would have been the largest domestic terrorist act in the history of the United States. And I came within seconds as a lone wolf of blowing up everybody in that gay church. So the reality of it for me is still painfully there, that how easy it is for somebody from my background that was raised non-racist, anti-violence, anti-gun, everything, to get to the point to where I was willing to take a bomb and kill people was a huge stretch of the imagination considering where I came from. Yet I still got to that point. So for one thing, when you're talking lone wolf mentality, the first thing that you're talking about is you're looking at the whole picture saying nobody is serious about causing upheaval in this country. It's one thing, and every lone wolf will get tired of just the talk in the movement, especially in their group. All you guys want to do is just talk. There's no action. And so they plan to take the action. Another part of it is, and I think Jeff mentioned it earlier, there's this thing of whether, no matter which group you're in, of sort of what we used to call earning your place in the kingdom. I'm going to do something that will put me down in the history books. I'm going to do something that nobody else is willing to do, whether it's just shooting a bunch of kids at a daycare or a bunch of Jews in a Jewish synagogue or whatever it might be. You've picked out your target. You're willing to do that to make a name for yourself. Part of that also is the deception that somebody has got to start this war. So you think that if I do it, everybody else is going to take up arms and do it too. In our day, it was called the Second American Revolution. We've heard the terms over the years of racial war. It doesn't matter what your overall objective is. You want to be the one that kind of starts the domino effect. Once you realize, and usually it's too late to realize it, that that's not what's going to happen. When I was sitting in the congregation at that gay church, part of what woke me up really was, I had to take the time to be there before I could set the bomb. And in that time, I'm obviously putting a face on the enemy because I'm right there in the midst of the enemy. So I was doing something that I wasn't supposed to do in terms of military action. So people cease to become, they just look like regular people at that point. Going into this gay church, when I was expecting to see this sexual orgy going on, which didn't happen, of course, started to tear down some of my stereotypes. And then once these people started worshiping God with the music, at that point they cease to be homosexuals, and they become Christians. So obviously the biggest thing that we have seen in quite a long time was the Oklahoma City bombing, as an example. We don't want to see anything like that again. I'm convinced when the famous picture when McVeigh's being brought out of the courthouse by the U.S. Marshals, and he's real stone-faced, and people from the crowd are saying, baby killer and all that kind of stuff. I'm absolutely convinced in my mind that McVeigh is thinking, you got right, I did it, and you're cowards if you don't do up that building, that other people were going to rise up. And he was disappointed to find out that that wasn't true. We expected it at CSA. Once we did what we did, we expected others to rise up. And most lone wolves expect that also. So I think part of the thing in tearing down lone wolves is, one, continually putting out the information of this is what people have done who are lone wolves, and what did it accomplish? Nothing, except people dying, and this person either dying or going to prison for a very, very long time. You got to continue reminding them hate does not work. Violence does not work. You're not going to be a hero. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, or you're going to die in a shootout. And that's what I've told people in the movement for years that have talked to me and said, I can't give this up. Well, if you don't give it up, guess what's going to happen to you? You're either going to die or you're going to go to prison, one or the other, because you cannot continue like you are forever and ever. So continually putting the light on these kind of actions, never forget it.
Clearly, you just froze, sorry.
It's so easy. Sorry.
No, you froze for a minute, go ahead. You froze.
Yeah. Oh, I froze. Sorry. But we tend to think lone wolf, it has a very scary name to it. And that was the purpose when that phrase was coined in the 80s. But the whole reason behind it was so that people, if you were in the original small cells, people could turn state's evidence against each other if they were caught. The lone wolf was supposed to do away with that. You could go out, you weren't accountable to anybody, nobody knew what you were doing, and that kind of stuff. The issue with it, of course, is most people, even in the movement, are not willing to cross the line into domestic terrorism or extreme violence. Fortunately, that's the case.
Kerry, you froze again. Clearly, people are not.
Very small percentage of people.
Kerry, you keep freezing.
I know. I'm sorry. I live rurally and I lose my connection.
It's okay. But I was going to say, though, is clearly many of the people who leave the movement, didn't want to get into the violence, and that's what started the path out. This has been an incredible conversation. I do want to, at some point we have to end, unfortunately, because of people's time. I think we have to do another series of it because everybody's so extraordinarily interesting. However, I think I'm going to do a tease, Jeff, so forgive me because I'm taking a leap here. And that is, people are asking, first of all, Acacia, we haven't really introduced you, and for that I'm apologetic. You were helping behind the scenes and on the camera, but Acacia is part of Beyond Barriers, and unfortunately was also someone who was in the movement, and fortunately he has left. And people are asking about women in the movement, and I think that we should do a great tease, and we can sort of end this conversation with a little bit of Acacia explaining it. And I think maybe, Jeff, the next webinar we're going to have to do is with women who left the movement, because we always talk about it from a male perspective. And I think a lot of us would like to understand how women were in the movement and or left and what their role was. So you want to do a little tease for us and give us a little bit of information, Acacia?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Making sure my mic was actually on. Yeah, I was involved with the National Socialist movement for about 2 years, and I actually got involved primarily from seeing how the far left was, and at that point in time, the National Socialist movement, or the NSM, didn't display the swastika publicly. They presented themselves only as a white civil rights organization, and so it became a very, very quick leap down the rabbit hole, I guess you could say, because it goes to prove that the movement can use any narrative to bring people in, and a lot of them you would not expect. And my mic is not working right. Is that better?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
It's fine.
It goes in and out sometimes. But essentially, the women's role in the movement, I was the propagandist for the NSM in my later time there. But a lot of people don't talk about the women's role. And the women's role is a lot of support. We are the mothers. We are the ones that, raise up the next generation of, children. And so even though we're not typically right there at the forefront of the movement, women definitely play more of a role than people would expect, I guess you could say. And especially nowadays, you are finding a lot more women being very prominent in the far right and in the right-wing movement. And I believe part of that is also because women's role in society has changed and has become a more upfront and prominent role. We're not only the caretakers and the mothers and taking care of the household and stuff. We're out there in the forefront of politics and business and everything else. And we will get into that definitely a lot more later on, because there's a lot of different nuances to it. It's not as cut and dry as a lot of people think. A lot of people think, the far right, it's a male-only movement, because that's what we've seen for so many years. And women do a lot of the background, and a lot of the things in the background. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It did. Thank you. Before we go, I know it's very late in this, but I just saw on my emails that someone who's listening sent an email, and I think this is a good way for all of us to sort of wrap this up for everybody's minds. And that is, Daryl, you suggested love, respect, ability to be heard, fair treatment of all, family acceptance. How do we, those not involved in what your work is, all of your work, how do we assess it? I'd like everybody to give a little wrap up on that. What could we be doing you know, to assist in creating this kind of bridges between communities and understanding between people. I'm going to go in order of who I see on the screen. So Kerry, what's your thought?
I think you got to be willing to just meet and mingle with people that are not like you. Go to a Jewish synagogue, go to one of their meetings, go to Black neighborhoods, talk to people, go to wherever you can that's almost out of your comfort zone, just to where you can get a feeling of what maybe everybody else goes through. But most of all, be the example also. You know, be kind to everybody. Don't judge people. Don't put them into your little box that's convenient for you. You know, realize, like Daryl said earlier, people are people and they want the same things that you want, basically. And once you get there and you experience that, then so much of what you might be kind of hiding in the shadows starts to fall apart. You know, and as you give and give, then that opens doorways to give more to people.
Jeff?
Yeah, basically open dialogue, having those conversations, being willing to listen, being willing to experience other things, and being open-minded conversations, learning, talking to others, and listening. Being open. It's really what it comes down to. A lot of people don't realize that people that get involved in this stuff, you know, fear is an incredible motivator. It's an incredibly motivating factor. So they think they're doing something good and noble, and to show them the humanity of the other, of someone that's sitting across from you is a human being with struggles and wants and desires and needs, just like you have. Breaking that barrier down and finding the commonalities is so incredibly important, because we have humanity is what we should be united upon, not dividing over race, over religion, or ethnicity, but humanity.
Red?
I got to second what Jeff said. I don't know that I could really word it any better. Realistically, folks, it comes down to dropping your differences, dropping your own prejudice, if you will, about somebody based on maybe how they look or what you perceive them to be. You know, have that open conversation with somebody. You might be surprised. Someone who looks a certain way might surprise you on how human they truly can be.
Acacia?
The biggest thing is, you know, dialogue. You know, we have our own preconceived notions about people, and whether they're good or bad, because not all of them are bad sometimes, but the biggest thing is looking beyond yourself and looking beyond the physical differences or the political differences, and looking at the individual as a human being, because that's what we all are. Your politics don't make you a human. Your physical features don't make you a human. What's inside, what's at the core. And I believe it was Martin Luther King Jr. that said to judge a man by his character. And that's what we need to do. So that's my 2 cents.
Larry?
So what we've already covered about reaching out to people who are different from you, I think we're 3 weeks away from our next conversation about cancel culture, right?
Yes,
I'll be on the show in a couple of weeks. So
yeah,
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, and I left you for last, Daryl, because it was your inspiration that's bringing us to this moment. You know, again, I thank you for what you said, and I do believe it. It's what I work in every single day, is to bring groups together to understand the differences. I say we need to understand our differences and share our commonality. And I believe we're working in the same, but again, what are the words of inspiration you can give to others who are not blessed as we are, and as Larry is, to work with people of diversity or, you know, formers? What way can others get involved in to create a better world?
Okay, well, if this was 2019, I'll tell you what I told people, then I'll tell you what I would tell them in 2020 and 2021, pre-pandemic. You know, people in metropolitan cities like I live right near Washington, D.C., or you're in Chicago, or, you know, Dallas or somewhere. They're diverse, and you work in a company, you might even work in the same cubicle with people of different colors, religions, etc. But what happens at 12 noon? Everybody goes downstairs to the cafeteria, and blacks sit with blacks, Hispanics sit with Hispanics. We self-segregate. Does that mean that we're racist? No, it does not. People tend to feel more comfortable around familiarity, people who share their culture or their language or whatever. And that's fine. But maybe, you know, once or twice a week, walk across the cafeteria, you know, leave your comfort group and go sit with somebody different, because you've got something to learn from them, and you've got something to teach them, and you might even pick up a new friend. Walk across the cafeteria. Now, of course, in 2020, 2021, we're not in cafeterias so much during the pandemic, but we have this tool, this beautiful tool right here, Alison, that you have put together to bring us all together, called the internet and Zoom or whatever. We can reach out to groups, join panel discussions with people of different backgrounds, sit on there and listen, contribute, you know, your feelings. People want to know how you feel. Listen to how they feel. We have this all right here. You know, I had the blessing of being able to travel a lot, and it doesn't make me a better person, but it gives me a broader perspective. And we don't have to go across the Atlantic Ocean right now when we have the internet, where we can contact people from all walks of life and join in a call like this. You said yourself, Alison, that you never would have dreamed you'd be sitting around talking to neo-Nazis, former neo-Nazis and KKK people. Look at me, I never dreamed that, look at me, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, we all are here doing it now. And this is the beauty of it. We all came from different backgrounds. We're all having this conversation. We all are learning a lot about each other. And we're leaving this call all better and more informed and higher educated about other people's perspectives. And that's what we're going to share with other people. Second thing I would say is this. I understand some people out there, you know, would not go to a Klan rally or a neo-Nazi rally. I would, okay, but that's me. I'm not advocating.
So would Rick Eaton, I think. Go ahead.
But I'm not saying, you know, okay, so when you leave this call, you know, go to your next Klan rally that happens in your town. Not necessarily, okay, if you want to do it, that's fine. But do something. If you're not on the front line, that's fine. Be on the back line. Be on the sideline. Be online. But be doing something, you know, to help support things. And one of the things you can help support is Beyond Barriers. Help support Alison Pure-Slovin. You know, these are people who are working hard. If you don't want to be on the front line, like I said, that's fine. Be on the back line, be on the sideline, but help support those people. We all need to come together, because what makes a great movie? Yes, sure, the stars that you see on the screen, but it's also the directors behind the cameras directing the things. You can be a director. You can be a best boy, a grip boy, one of those things, you know, that help make that movie an Oscar.
Thank you. Acacia and Jeff and Beyond Barriers and my new friends, Larry, Red, and Daryl and Kerry, thank you. It was my honor and privilege to speak with all of you today. And I'm glad that the Simon Wiesenthal Center brought us all together. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shalom, y'all.
Shalom.
So,
Bye-bye.